Today we are talking with psychotherapist Jeffrey Frank about how you can get your personal life back on track in these difficult financial times. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sure.
It strikes me that there may be two sort of polar opposites here. One, people kind of losing their love life because they're stressed out about financial circumstances. But the other factor here is when people are stressed out like this, they tend to drink or drugs, or sexual addiction is another component to it as well.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I think you're referring to like acting out. You know, maybe things don't feel so comfortable in a relationship, or they're not getting what they want from the relationship, so they look for kind of outside outlets to make that feel a little more soothed to them.
Right.
That they're not getting.
I read this in the New York Times. This is interesting. I'm sure you probably read through this. Married men and women, on average, have sex with their spouse 58 times a year. That's a little more than once a week. It said married people under 30 have sex about, this is so scientific, 111 times a year. Where did they get that number? But 58 times a year? Mm-hmm. That's it?
You're surprised?
Yeah,
It's kind of like that old Woody Allen movie where he has a shot of each spouse visiting a psychotherapist immediately, and one says, "Doctor, we never have sex, never, like maybe 3 times a week," and then the other spouse says, "Doctor, we're always having sex 3 times a week."
I'm sorry, if it's 58 times, I may not walk down the aisle.
Right. Well, that's great. I mean, I think that's a good point. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder, I think. Yeah. And I think it does trip up couples. It makes them anxious. It makes them concerned, worry about the quality of their relationship if they're not having a certain amount of sexual activity in their marriage. And I think that is a misconception. And I think it's really damaging to a relationship if that's your benchmark for how your relationship is.
That's your barometer of, are we working out? Well, let's see what we did this week.
Absolutely.
So where do you begin with a couple that comes in to see you and says, well, they have been counting. I'm only getting it once a month.
Well,
what do you do?
Usually I'd be curious, you know, about this. The sexuality is pretty physical, it's very straightforward, it's kind of easy to describe, but I would be asking about intimacy, which some people kind of fuse those two together, but I like to untangle them a bit to find out exactly what their level of intimacy is. And that can be different things. That doesn't have to do with sexuality. It can just be being with the other person, taking a walk in the evening, just being interested in your partner, not necessarily the sex part, but even just keeping someone in mind. If those things start to diminish, then there's some problems.
So sexual activity in some ways is kind of a barometer of how the relationship may be going in other ways?
Well, it could be looked at that way. Definitely, you know, if there is a big drop-off or a dramatic shift, it's something to be attended to, and I think it is also important for couples to speak to it, not to kind of go off into their own corners and mull about it, stew about it, resent it, kind of make up scenarios about why it's there, but to kind of turn around to each other to face whatever it is that they might be dealing with.
In your experience at your practice in DuPont Circle, do you see more couples coming in because of what's happening with the economy, because of that stress level, that maybe they're turning outward instead of inward in their relationship?
Yeah, I can't really say that they're coming in specifically for the economic stressors, but just I think stressors across the board are impacting people and disrupting their comfortability with themselves, and then in turn comfortability in their relationship. So
the other part of this article, about 15% of married couples have not had sex with their spouse in the last 6 months to 1 year.
Yeah.
Yikes.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
But then again, you know, things tend to ebb and flow in marriages, and as a couple, you know, live together longer, that frequency is not necessarily all that important anymore. Is that true?
Well, again, I do try to assess other areas of the relationship just besides the sex, and if there's other areas that are not being fulfilled between the couple, those are areas that I would want to go in and see what the problems are, see if there's room for improvement, or some resolution, and then and then hopefully the sex part adds into that, as opposed, I guess that's kind of more of a bottom up rather than from a top.
I've heard of some couples who have stopped having sex entirely because they're together to raise the children, for example, and so it remains a marriage literally of convenience and for the children.
Well, if there's still something there, if there's still companionship, security, interest in one another, interest in being together, I think that counts for a lot, and it shouldn't be discounted against the sexual activity levels in the relationship.
Are you seeing people, the divorce rate go up because of the sex life just fizzling out? Or do people just deal with it more?
Well, it's probably a combination of both, I guess. But I do believe that people put this value that is coming externally onto the relationship, this pressure to have a certain amount of sex, and then if it's not there, then they're feeling somehow deficient or that their relationship doesn't measure up. And I think that's the problem.
They're probably reading articles like this thinking, that's not me.
That's
oh
not
my
helpful.
gosh,
Right,
what am I
right,
going to do?
Right, exactly.
But I think there's this stigma of people reaching out, coming to see people like you.
Oh.
Maybe, you know, the woman in the relationship wants to, the man doesn't, or, you know, one partner does, one partner doesn't.
Yeah.
You see that a lot?
Absolutely. There's usually one person being dragged, unfortunately.
By the collar.
Right. But I think for the most part, at least in my practice, that I think the person who, the draggee, is often, I think, surprised at what they can receive in a setting like that. And that it's not judgmental, it's not accusatory, that it's a place where they can feel free to express themselves, where in the context of their relationship day to day, it's not so comfortable or the conditions aren't okay for them.
Maybe in some respects that's exactly what they needed.
Get that fizzle back in that life.
They liked being dragged
Oh,
in.
okay, well.
It might be, right? It might work.
Then that would be a focus of attention also for us.
Doctor, thank you for coming in. This is an interesting topic.